When you look at the lineup of Disney villains featured in their products, who do you remember? Maleficent, Ursula, or perhaps even more obscure characters, like Edgar from the Aristocats. But much like how Disney wants its audience to forget about The Black Cauldron, a film so dark that it caused backlash 40-plus years ago and is still considered tarnishing to the brand, there is one villain that is glossed over in their catalog. And that is a sorcerer named Mosenrath. Originally intended to be the primary, the higher-pitched register of the male voice began to sob loudly. "Why won't you ever leave me alone? Please, just stop." I then heard the lower register of the same voice cackle, then yell out, "Well, you created me, fucker. No use trying to get rid of me." The higher-pitched voice began wailing and presumably banging on the recording equipment. "I'm everything that you hate about yourself. Even when you die, I'll still walk the earth and remind everyone what a piece of asterisk you are," chuckled the lower register. I then heard the higher register scream at the top of their lungs, then heard a sound that indicated they were forcefully thrown against the studio wall. I abruptly hit the stop button on the player and yanked off the headphones. What on God's green earth was that? I asked Bill, bewildered by the studio audio akin to a horror movie that I had just listened to. "We accidentally left the tape running one day after our actor for Mosenrath, John, had finished his lines," he replied. "Did he have dissociative identity disorder?" I asked, attempting to make sense of the situation. "Not that his doctor knew of." When we were nearing completion of his voice lines, he ran out of the studio one day screaming, "He can't do this anymore," and was reported missing 5 hours later. Even after a week-long search, he was never found. My mouth hung open in shock as Bill continued to recount the actor's disappearance. When we went back to our project room, we discovered he had scrawled all over our concept art, burned script pages featuring the character, and even ripped apart master tapes. I don't know what happened to him. He was such a nice kid, and he even wrote most of his own character scenes. That night, I lay awake in my hotel bed, wondering about the disturbing recording and accompanying story I had heard that day. Did the voice actor simply have an undiagnosed mental disorder, triggered by the stress of making a movie with strict deadlines? I was no longer concerned with the idea of lost scripts and drawings, but with the nature of John's disappearance. I decided to draft up a plan to get into the recording studio where the audio had originated, unbeknownst to Bill. I had managed to write the studio name from the master tape down in my notes and research it, finding it only to be a 1-mile BRT trip away. When I arrived, I expected to find a well-manicured, high-profile building. Instead, I found a drab brick rectangle that appeared to have not changed since the 1990s. Quickly assuming it was abandoned, I looked up the studio name and found that it was still listed as being open. Maybe it had become a smaller studio and wasn't as popular with big-name producers and film companies. I walked up to the door and was able to open it with ease, meaning that it was clearly still open. The hallway looked strangely empty, but it was clean and appeared well kept. I walked around and eventually found a sign that directed me downstairs to the actual recording rooms. I then heard a shuffling noise coming from one of the rooms. I figured the owner might have the place empty for a designated cleaning day, given that there's a lot of audio recording equipment that needs to be cleaned between uses. I then heard a noise that sounded like a low-pitched dog's growl. A recording studio owner with a dog in the building. Tetch, only in California. I suddenly heard a loud slam that sounded like a body ramming up against glass. I whipped my head around to look for the source of the noise. I now realized I was standing on the outside of a recording booth, looking through the tempered glass at someone inside. They had long, unkempt black hair that hung over their faces, and from what I could see, they had unusually pale skin. At first, I was just slightly unnerved by their appearance, but I quickly dismissed it, as there are plenty of unusual-looking people in California. However, everything changed when he jerked his head up to meet my gaze. His pupils were unnaturally dark, and he had dark circles around his eyes. As he slammed his right arm against the glass, I could see that his hand was rotted through to the bone. Yet he still had control over his fingers. Exposed muscle and tissue surrounded by clotted blood were visible on his upper arm, almost as if acid had been eating away at it. He let out a guttural scream that I instantly recognized as identical to the lower register in that audio recording. I screamed even louder than the people inside this recording booth and began to run back upstairs and out of this building. It bellowed, "You left me here to rot." Without warning, it shrieked in an unnaturally high manner, almost like a full-on banshee cry. I could hear several more loud thuds as it sounded like the creature threw its body against the glass with full force in an attempt to break free. By the time I had gotten to the exit of this building, my heart was beating so hard that I thought I had run a marathon. I heard one final howl coming from the basement as I shut the glass front door and hurtled towards the BRT station as fast as I could. I left LA the same day. I didn't tell Bill about my trip to the studio or what I had seen. I simply told him I had to go back home for an important work meeting. I updated everyone on the wiki and simply said that the original documents hadn't been archived, and unfortunately, there was nothing that could be done. Interest in the topic quickly sizzled out. Do me a favor, if you've gotten this far, please go on with your day and don't tell anyone else about my experience. I think this was realized by John too late, but the more you acknowledge Mosenrath, the stronger he gets, and one day he may end up shattering that acoustic glass that currently contains him. The antagonist in the third Aladdin film, King of Thieves, all of the animation tests, scripts, and even voice recordings for the character disappeared after the director of the film decided to introduce another character, Aladdin's father. My name is Mary, and I specifically work with lost media cases like this. Scripts that clearly exist but haven't surfaced anywhere on the internet. Animation tests that the world would love to see but are unfortunately sealed away. These kinds of missions rely on knowing the right people and bringing them up at the right time. I had been on this search for 4+ years, along with a dedicated community at the Lost Media Wiki and across the internet. After scouring some credits for other Aladdin media, I managed to find a key animator's name that actually led me to an active Twitter account and IMDb page. This was Bill, an active animator for many other successful shows. It was perplexing why his original idea for the movie was dropped so late in production. So naturally, I considered him to be a significant lead in this years-long search. After some back-and-forth messaging, I managed to gather that this concept for the film was ditched because it was too dark for the overall tone of the movie. But that didn't explain the documentation, or lack thereof, of scripts, recordings, and animation tests for the film. When I brought this up, Bill stated, "Sometimes things can't be fully understood by the general public, and uploading them can give a community more questions than answers." Despite this unusual reply, we eventually decided to meet in person. I updated the countless Discord servers and wiki users with my plan, and the community cheered me on. This was going to be a satisfying end to an ongoing search, or so I thought. When I arrived in Buena Vista, Bill met me at a coffee shop and eventually took me back to his studio, where he kept a small archive of things that he had worked on at Disney and other producers. Surprisingly, instead of pulling concept art or script papers from his bookshelf, he pulled out a rather large tape player and what looked to be a master tape. Bill looked me dead in the eyes. "Mary, I need you to listen to this." He said it sternly. I was confused, to say the least, but I took the pair of headphones he gave me and placed them over my ears. "Please, what do you want from me?"